You're now so well trained that you're assembled before I've actually thought about the fact that it's time to start the conference. Welcome back to our second last session. And I don't think the numbers really have thinned this much. I think it's just people are, I hope they haven't thinned this much. I know some people have already started catching planes to go to other places, and it really disappoints me that, airlines can't seem to work their way around conferences better. Actually, that's one that always reminds me, a classic example of the application of ICT to business models. It was in the context of the tourism piece and the person who was booking their hotel room from the foyer because it was a tweet. Someone booked a hotel room from a foyer because they got the better deal online than they did from the counter. So they actually booked online in the foyer of a hotel. But it reminds me of the simple fact about how much online booking changed the airline industry. You're all familiar with the idea that you go online and you see all these different price schedules for different fare structures. And that's all about yield management functions. Long gone are the days where you used to look forward to being able to book the unpopular flight because you knew you could get a seat empty beside you. Because almost every plane is full because of the way they use that yield management system. It's a really fascinating piece of how ICT has changed an industry quite dramatically. That said, we're not talking about airlines now. This afternoon we're going to talk about the drivers of rural demand and all people who live outside of the cities, no matter what their occupation. So we've got four participants with us this morning. This afternoon. Their CVs are once again in the program, but just introducing from right to left, Liz Evans, who's the National President of the Rural Women New Zealand, Phil McKenzie, who comes to us from Landcorp Estates and will talk to us about farms, Potaua, I didn't get his last name, Biasiny-Tule, but Potaua, who is an Indigenous academic and has been tweeting as digital Maori, and I said that as an Australian would say it, and I apologise. And Antony Royal, who's an electrical engineer and is going to talk to us about some of the other opportunities that the project themselves offer. This time they've been given, because it's sort of new topic we haven't really discussed at all before, each has been given 7 minutes to introduce before we go into the panel session. So could you please welcome Liz to the stage. Okay, talk about a change of pace. Really, really, really interesting presentations from all four of you. It's actually almost a proposition to say that to a large degree, all of you said the driver for demand in rural areas will be availability. That really the biggest thing holding back many parts of rural areas today is simply the lack of availability of any broadband service, let alone high-speed broadband. And then the last piece, which is, and what are the other economic opportunities that come from that, in the sense that if you're doing a construction project, why would you import people from somewhere other than the place where you're building stuff? One could then add to that the question, I know that our Prime Minister in Australia is very keen on the whole skills agenda, and one of the core focuses she's got on is the ability of broadband to be the place through which you provide skills training. So, remember when they built railway lines across America and you saw them in all the movies and you sort of had the train coming up behind the train line? You can be taking the online training to the current boundary of the network, bring people back to that place for doing the training and then roll them out into the next frontier. Look, I could ask you questions for hours. I think you could talk on them for hours, but let's give the people out there a chance first, because I let them speak longer than their allotted time because they're all doing such a wonderful job. Do I have any questions for the panel? There's one down there. And sometimes I really do regret that I'm a 50-year-old male, but there's not much I can do about it.
Hi, Brian Pauling from the Broadcasting School. The late and much-loved Paul Reynolds was involved in a pilot project up in Tuhoi country, putting in broadband for marae. Are you able to give us an update on that, or tell us how it's being used and whether it's successful or otherwise?
Yeah. I think it's... I'm not allowed to speak unless it's going, am I?
Yeah, it's on.
I think you're referring to Tūhoe Wireless project. As I understand it, it's still running, still operational. They're still experimenting with how they're going to use it. There are a number of other similar projects, including one that Te Wānanga Awanui-a-Rangi are running in Whakatane, where they're actually providing a lot of broadband. In advance of UFB, we're providing broadband into schools. Beyond that, I'm actually not too sure what else they're doing down there.
Because Tūhoe is such an isolated area, some of my uncles like to use the technology by strapping the devices to their dogs. So when they send them out hunting, they know which hill the pig is at. So that's how Tūhoe kind of... but more homes want to get connected, but yeah, it's the access thing and the price, and because of that, people move to Whakatane, and then it gets better, and then better job offers in Hamilton, better, then job offers in Wellington, Auckland, better, and then you go to Aussie. So what, 600,000 Maori, 1 in 5 live in Australia. And so those Tūhoe that can get connected at home and do make the most of it will, but we're finding a lot of them can't make those opportunities happen, so piss off over to Oz. Bloody traitors, you can hear me. Yeah, but we've got to find the opportunities.
But one of the, sorry, just to put down, one of the interesting things is that there are quite a lot of Māori who do live in Australia, and I've got cousins who were born there, and some of them have not even been to New Zealand, but they still identify with this place. And the way that they, in the future, I think, will identify will be through having that connection back to the marae. Many of them know their marae, but have never been there.
And I guess the marae is the best. Sometimes the community hall is the best place, sometimes the school is the best place, but we're finding increasingly the marae is the best place. If you got an internet connection there and help get some kind of signal to the surrounding houses, then that's better than what we've got today. But no one's even thinking there. We are, because we're at the marae going, this is dumb. You know, we've done all the fishing, we've done all the digging, we've done all the sweeping, but we want to get onto these and we can't. And my koro goes, what's your job? And I say, IT, show me. Yeah, where's the rest of it? So,
Which is an interesting comment in itself, because in the olden days you could show IT without connectivity, but these days you really can't. I mean, it's interesting, that marae conversation, which sort of also comes back to the same conversation about the rural women's piece, which is you've got to make and even the farming one, you've got to make the connectivity available so that people can then be shown the opportunity that's available to them. But you can't show them the opportunity if they haven't got the connectivity. Is that... Liz?
Yeah, I agree. And as I alluded to in my presentation, it's a matter of leadership, I think. And I've sat here for nearly 2 days now listening to a lot of stuff that, you know, I'm the first one to admit I didn't understand much of, the technical and the jargon. I don't... You know, where does the leadership from the sector kick in for, I mean, you're talking business, okay, I realise that, but we're about leadership in our organisation, and if we don't lead our members and the communities that they come from, you know, to get connected or to become more informed or educated, well, we're, you know, not doing our job. I mean, look, I sat there before I came up on stage. I was sitting down the front here, and there was a couple of guys, a couple of seats along. They were looking at the program, and they were discussing whether or not it would be worth staying for this. And in the end, they decided no, because it just wasn't worth their time. And there's no difference between rural and urban anyway. So that's not leadership to me.
Well, I mean, to put it into marketing speak, there's two kinds of things you can talk about as a marketer thinking about demand. They break it into primary demand and secondary demand management. Primary demand management is demand for the product category. Secondary demand management is demand for your brand of that product. And one of the consequences of highly competitive markets or what purport to be competitive markets, is you get a great big focus on secondary demand management. So you're fighting about the customers that are already customers of the category, and you completely forget about primary demand management. You forget about talking to the people who could be your customers but aren't. And I think that's partly what I'm hearing you saying. People have forgotten to talk to the people who don't currently buy the product. And that's, I think, an opportunity that's being missed. Sorry, down there.
Thank you. John Allen from Rural Connect. It's not a question. I need to make the point that you talk about leadership, Liz. The 3 reports that are fed into this conference, 2 of them mention rural not at all, and 1 of them mentioned rural only in the context of, yes, there's an issue. So in terms of leadership, we haven't seen it in the lead up to this conference. Too many people see the UFB as being ubiquitous, as being applying everywhere, and don't appreciate that rural areas who actually have the most to gain from high-speed broadband are not counted in that. By government design, the RBI gives rural people 5 megabits per second as a peak minimum speed. There's no way that rural people are going to get the sorts of services that have been talked about in this conference. 2 of those Commerce Commission papers have a table at the front of them that lists all of the services that require high-speed broadband. Most of those services are outside of the range of the 5 megabit per second service that the RBI people will give rural people. So yes, Liz, leadership's required, and in the rural sense, we're not seeing anything. We didn't hear anything at all from Amy Adams this morning.
Well, I can't comment on that for a whole range of reasons, but does any of the panellists have a view on that? Or let me phrase it slightly differently. Is RBI still a goal worth pursuing, or should we be saying, look, we don't need that, we should be waiting 8 years for a UFB to reach us?
My guess is this. Look, RBI is a done deal. There's not much we can do about that. As much as you may agree or disagree with it, look, that's the plan. The issue now is, beyond RBI, are there some other ways in which we can be developing our connectivity? So there are a lot of Wi-Fi providers out there who provide services that RBI is not necessarily going to kill. So there is an opportunity for others to actually start provide services. One of the things I felt happened when we went through that whole RBI UFB thing was that everybody kind of stopped doing anything because RBI and UFB was going to solve it all. Well, it won't. We've still got to have those people who are out there looking for those niche services and provide those kind of services that allow us to do these things. Now, 700 megahertz coming along. When that 4G LTE is deployed in 700, that may well give us some additional services. But there's nothing to stop people actually today figuring out alternative solutions. And I know that there is a lot of work going on in that area. In fact, there's one guy in this audience who's doing a lot of work in this area right now, at least one, probably 2, or maybe even 10.
Anyone else have a...
Yeah, I'm loath to recommend government regulation, but in this instance, I think if the government takes a hands-off approach, then rural communities will suffer, Maori communities will definitely suffer, and all the big boys with all the big toys will get everything. And that's partly why we like getting small groups in the room and giving them a bloody hiding.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what else can we do? We can make submissions, we can talk to MED, we can talk to the minister, and it still goes back to the boss is Vodafone, the boss is Telecom, and they're going to tell us what they want. The boss is Sky. Fucking slap yourself. I think when I went to California last year, end of last year, beginning of this year, I was listening to the guy from Samsung at the CES 2012 talking about ecosystems. Everyone's talking about ecosystems, what the app, the device, the connection, the content. There's a 5th one somewhere. And I was like, back home, we've been talking about Maori holistic ecosystems forever. So, you know, we don't separate ourselves, we live it all. But in the marketing speak, everyone's just caught up. So our interests are not protected, in this society because the government wants the market to prevail. And that's all good if you're market focused and if you're in town or if you've got a big job with the big pay, but what about the rest of us?
Liz, do you have a comment or are you going to let that one pass? Or
yeah. I'll make a comment, and I think these guys are right. I think there will be some innovative solutions that come out. The big challenge is it's a numbers game. The rural area is big on area and small on numbers. But it's a chicken and egg thing. If we want the numbers back in our communities, we need to find solutions that bring them back. And we've gone out and invested in some things of our own to solve our own problems. And maybe as rural industries, we need to get together and invest a bit more heavily in this area because we want the solution. Maybe that's how we show some leadership.
A couple of questions. The gentleman over there beside the aisle, you had your hand up, didn't you, sir? The blue shirt. Did you have your hand up? No? Just Bronwyn.
Bronwyn Howell, New Zealand Institute for the Study of Competition and Regulation. I'd just like to sort of go back and look a bit more into history as well and go back to the early 2000s when, in fact, Fonterra took some leadership, in fact, in commissioning the construction of some infrastructure to move out into the areas that supported their farms, noting that, there's more to the politics than just the politics of government that can contribute to that, and to note that those sorts of leadership things have happened previously. But also, perhaps, looking at the issue that came, Phil, from your Landcorp example about how much of this at the productive end on the farm is actually about connectivity to the rest of the world, and how much of it is about connecting the back paddock to the farmhouse.
It's definitely...
I think a lot of it is about connecting the back of the farm to the front of the farm. But we're very conscious, and perhaps as farmers maybe not as conscious as we should be, but our customers live here or on the other side of the world, so we have to connect with them. So it is about global connection, but knowing what's happening locally so that you can inform your customers what's going on and get their feedback. So yeah, it's very much a wider than just the front paddock to the back of the paddock, because to do that, probably we don't need the same amount of broadband. Farms can run without broadband, but to be more productive and profitable, we need it.
And there's always an economy of scale issue there, which is getting the data around from the back paddock to the front paddock is interesting in and of its own right. But if I can get the data from the back paddock to the front paddock and then to the world, then the investment I need to make on my own farm for the information technology grows. So, there are ecosystems.
Sometimes we don't want all of our in-farm information out there because our competitive advantage around things like the livestock improvement database is actually about not letting it get to the rest of the world. And there's issues about the tradability of some of that stuff because we make money out of keeping that intellectual property there. And I think that's a tension that we have to think about when we look at what we share and what we keep at home.
We could get into a long conversation about how you manage the privacy and security of your information online. Look, I really found this conversation interesting, and my comment would be don't despair of RBI, because the story is you need to get these communities connected, and these communities, once connected, will be demonstrating to people why they need even more connection once they're connected. But it's really, really hard, and it's a starting point. Sorry, you wanted to ask another question, Mr. Rural Broadband, Mr. Rural whatever?
It's actually not the rural broadband that we despair of, it's the government. Because they've designed a system that really does serve rural people poorly.
And that's the place that I think we've had that answer. And I'm saying, there comes times in life where you have to, you live with what you've got. You live with what you're dealt. We have governments, you elect governments, you've just re-elected this government. You mightn't have personally, but the nation has. So deal with the reality you have, and the reality and make the most of the reality you've got. Is I suppose my simple point. It's great to sit here and have a conversation, which we are doing, about what are the dreams and stuff. But in the final analysis, the question is, what do we do, or what do we do tomorrow? What are the real things that the individuals in this room can do to drive a future broadband future? That's I suppose my reason for sort of going down that path, and I thought it was just important to focus on. You know, we have this general conversation that says, build it and they will come, oh, that's a crazy dream. This community is actually one of those classic cases where build it and they will come is actually coming at you from all directions. I'm not sure the same is true of building UFB in metro areas. And then the only other, because we are out of time, the other part I wanted to really emphasise was this piece that Liz said about leadership. And if I heard you rightly, Liz, you were going to provide that leadership because you were thinking about replicating the UK initiative. In fact, set yourself goals about how many of your members to get online. And I think that's another point that got raised by this panel. Let's talk management speak. We're all leaders, folks. Leaders aren't just those few people you select through a ballot process and say, you're my leader. Everyone in this room is a leader, and the question is how much leadership you want to exercise, not just how much leadership government wants to.
I like that on leadership, because I think the leaders in this room would be well placed to come back to the leaders in our communities, rural communities, on our marae, and talk. Like Maori have a collective asset base of $30 billion, and we're talking about geothermal in Rotorua, Taupo. There's a lot of activity going on, but the leaders here don't often talk to our leaders. So we wait for this is my talk, charlatan marketers to come and tell us what's good for us, rather than having some real, actual dialogues about the benefits that you can bring to our communities. I think if leader-to-leader forums would be more productive and more useful for us, but sometimes the marketing just captures our imagination and saws us away, but we're still waiting.
Okay, sorry. Does anyone else on the panel have anything they want to add at this point? I've got a bit combative, which I shouldn't do.
I'm quite excited by some of the new technologies. Paul Breslin mentioned yesterday 3D printing, and that's an exciting technology which is being built right now, and people experimenting, and quite a few people experimenting in New Zealand. So you can imagine for a rural community to be able to 3D print your own pieces. I mean, you could actually get to the point, I suppose, where you could print your own tractor and not have to get it delivered. You could design your own tractor, print it at home. There's quite a few different applications for 3D printing. Interesting, we haven't talked much about open source, but open source hardware, open source cars, the whole infrastructure that's going to be built around alternative vehicles that are going to require all of this infrastructure, and is going to be required right across the whole New Zealand, including in rural.
And just to follow up, before the dollars and the cents comes in, just make sure that your focus is on the culture and the wairua, the spirit of the people. Because what I liked about the ecosystem talk in CES is that they said we're going to take away the hardware, take away the software, and worry about the people. We're not going to call them customer, not going to call them consumer, we're going to try and call them friends. What do our friends want? What do our families want? See, you kind of got to strip away all of the layers of the onion of the marketing and see a person needs this, this family wants that, this marae deserves that. And it's something that I don't think city folk understand. Take for granted.
At that point, I think I will bring this panel session to a close. I think we could actually have a whole conference on rural broadband, and possibly it's deserved. But for now, I would just like you to all join me in thanking this panel.